So I think most of you are here, so a very warm welcome. It's great to have so many of you attending this event. Welcome to the fourth in a series of good events we've been running this year called Change Conversations. And this is an event for charities and NFPs designed to provide much needed inspiration and stimulation in the sector. And post-pandemic, as we're all venturing back into the office, it's clear that things have changed and life will never be the same. And it's good for us to talk through that change with a great conversation. And that's what we're hoping to have today. So this event is all about the power of brand and what this might mean for charities. And in particular, we're going to be exploring brands who might be seeking to clarify their purpose and their cases for support, what the relationship might be now, and has it changed between brand and fundraising, and some of those tensions that might be existing post-pandemic. We'll be talking about how you can create a big brand impact when investment is a constant challenge. We'll be talking about integration and also what we might be able to learn from commercial brands. So we are The Good Agency. We're a strategy and creative agency, and we're all about working for the world. We were set up 25 years ago to serve charities, not-for-profits and commercial brands to demonstrate good. And we're all about helping you to really communicate your need and your case for support. And today I'm joined by a fantastic lineup of panelists. It's incredibly exciting, each representing a very different kind of charity brand. So in no particular order, I'm going to introduce our guests. So firstly, a very warm welcome to Simon Antrobus, who is the Chief Executive of BBC Children in Need. So a very warm welcome to you. He's been the Chief Executive and held the post since November 2016. Simon has worked in the voluntary sector for over 25 years. And prior to this, he was Chief Executive of We Are With You, before which he was Chief Executive of Clubs for the Young. So a very warm welcome. Secondly, we also have Deborah Alsina, MBE, Chief Executive of Independent Age. So a very warm welcome, Deborah. Deborah joined Independent Age in October 2019 and has a wealth of professional experience from academic think tanks to charities to working on international refugee and human rights issues. So very warm welcome. Deborah has also worked for Bowel Cancer UK for 11 years, included 10 years as a Chief Executive. In 2017, she played a leading role in merging Bowel Cancer UK and Beating Bowel Cancer, becoming the Chief Executive of the newly merged charity in 2018. Welcome also to Jane George, Director of Fundraising, Marketing and Media at RNLI. Jane is returning to the RNLI after an 11-year break, where she was formerly a managing director of the sales company. She's also been director of fundraising and communications at Guide Dogs, and has also worked as a consultant internationally and domestically to advise charities and NGOs on fundraising, marketing, and campaign strategies. Jane has also held a number of senior positions at Save the Children and the Children's Society and other charities too, so a very warm welcome. And last but by no means the least, a very warm welcome to Angela Cummings, who is the Deputy Director of Marketing Communications and Digital Services at Sue Ryder. Angela is responsible for leading Sue Ryder's Marketing and Communications Directorate, which includes brand marketing, PR, digital, internal communications, and influencing teams. She has spent over 15 years working in the third sector with healthcare charities and is passionate about using supporter stories to build engagement and trust. So a very warm welcome to you, Angela. So before we get into a great conversation, I'm just going to do a little bit of quick housekeeping. If you're having any technical difficulties, then please do message the Good Agency username, and there is somebody on standby to help you. We are recording this session and we will make it available to anyone who does want a copy of it, but you'll have to email us at hello@goodagency.co.uk if you would like a copy. If you've got any comments or questions during this conversation, then you can post them in the chat. And what I will be doing during this conversation is reading some of them out to help stimulate that flow of dialogue, and we'll try and get to as many questions at the end. I can't guarantee that I'm going to be able to cover all of them, but I'll do my very best. So let's have a great conversation. Such a broad range of brands being represented today. We have BBC Children in Need, a brand with a huge amount of equity and awareness. We've got Independent Age beginning the journey of brand transformation, and certainly an organisation in great change. We've got RNLI, a real challenger brand that doesn't traditionally invest huge amounts in brand, but without a doubt is not afraid to assert a very strong voice, particularly in PR. And we've got Sue Ryder, a brand confidently moving to own one of the most topical national conversations of our times, all around grief and kindness. I thought it'd be really nice to just get a few personal reflections from our panelists on how they might be working on brand, what's keeping them awake at night. And I think we'll start with Simon. Simon, as the Chief Executive of BBC Children in Need, how are you engaging in brand?
Thanks. Yeah, well, it's great to be here first. Thank you.
Welcome.
I guess brand is a massive and important issue for BBC Children in Need. And some of you may have noticed that we launched our appeal campaign only this week. And I have to say that in the last couple of years of being at BBC Children in Need, we have been thinking long and hard about our brand. It's almost a kind of daily issue for us. Tomorrow there's a significant brand workshop going on in the organisation. And I say that not because we're talking about, as you all probably know, not because we're talking about the logo or the kind of the words that you might see, BBC Children in Need, but because I think one of the biggest challenges that we face as an organisation, or any organisation for that matter, is how do we get across our ambition, our charitable ambition, our purpose, our reason for being in terms of children and young people. And we do that through our partnership with the BBC. So we have to think long and hard about what that is. And for me, in terms of brand, that's where I kind of locate everything. I locate it in the what is it that we stand for, and how do we articulate that? Not so much in the what is BBC Children in Need, but what do we stand for and how do we talk about it? And we've been thinking long and hard in our preparation for this year's appeal and our campaign about, well, what is it we're going to stand for this year? What is it that we're going to talk about in terms of children and young people, and how do we get that message across in an environment where there's lots of things going on, there's lots of competition for people's time. So for us, brand is absolutely critical.
And what about you, Deborah? How much do you get involved in the brand conversations for the organisation that's in great change and transformation? You're just on mute, so you'll just need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. So hugely, I think, is the answer to that. So I would agree with Simon that, for me, brand is more than branding, the visual identity. It's about the essence of the charity. It's about our core. It's about what we do, the values and the ways that we work, and our contribution to addressing the kind of the big why question about why we need to exist in the first place. So I think the challenge at Independent Age is, most people probably won't have heard of us, but we've been around for 158 years. And that's both a blessing and a curse, in the sense that at the moment it's a bit of a blessing because we're doing a huge strategic thinking process. So we're going through a massive sort of fairly transformational change. And actually that gives us an opportunity to really resolve some of those questions, to think about the core of how we can add most impact without that pressure of change in a very public setting when everybody's kind of expecting you to be able to, like with BBC Children in Need, when it's very kind of out there public, you're on TV. we have the luxury of being able to really hone our thinking, our messaging, to iterate, to test and learn. And at that particular point, we will then move into branding, so the visual identity that best describes who we are, what we do, and why we exist in the first place. So right now, you know, we have an interim branding in place, and of course been involved in that, but actually total preoccupation for me, you know, leading an organization going through lots of change about those very big strategic questions, which for me are a core part of an organizational brand.
What about you, Jane? From your perspective at RNLI, how involved are you? And I know you've just returned to the organisation after 11 years.
So I see myself as the #1 brand champion at the RNLI. We deliberately brought back together all of our communications team, whether their function was fundraising, marketing, or indeed kind of looking after our supporters in the wider sense, our voluntary army of supporters. So for me, it's everything I do is consistent with what our brand is for. And what we decided quite early on in my kind of second tenure is that our brand was for positioning us as a trustworthy organisation that our supporters, and I mean supporters in the broadest sense, could feel part of. And we have the one crew mantra. So no matter how little or much somebody donates or gives their time to, they are considered an equal part of our crew. So why is that important? Because our brand is for fundraising. We are utterly reliant on the support and kindness of our donors to do what we do. But we also have an influencing role, particularly in the areas of water safety. So our brand has to do both of those things for us. We build all of that brand equity in those areas by driving meaningful, effective content in all of our channels. So I was going to say I'm fortunate. I think the RNLI's brand is pretty simple to dissect in terms of why it needs to have standout, why it needs to do the jobs that we need it to do. And I think other organisations, particularly those campaigning or in advocacy, have a very different role. So, you know, so it is unique. One thing that we managed to avoid just when I came back was undertaking a review of our branding, i.e. the logo and strapline, because that would have been disastrous 2 years before our 200th anniversary. So I think we saved the day when we decided to put a halt to that work at that time.
Thank you. And what about you, Angela? Your reflections, please.
So I think, like Jane, I am kind of, I guess, the key brand champion of our organisation. Our brand is hugely important to us, and we have been on a brand journey really since 2018 when we refreshed the brand. I guess we have, I mean, sometimes it's sort of a problem, sometimes an asset, but we've got 450 shops. And so that's a great face on the high street. But what it often means is that people think of us as a charity shop retailer and don't necessarily know what we do beneath that. So we have been on this journey since 2018 to kind of position ourselves as a much loved national charity. You may have seen we've recently launched a new campaign called Grief Kind, which is about helping the nation to become grief kind and be able to support others. So we're trying very hard to position ourselves as that bereavement charity. But we use our brand. So it's important for fundraising. We work really closely with our fundraising team. They're not in the same director as us, but we work very closely with them indeed. But we don't just support fundraising, we support our retail as well, and our influencing team. We are quite influential, and the stronger our brand and the more consistent our brand is, the more that helps with our fundraising, with our retail, and with our influencing work.
So can we start with a definition of brand then? Because what's quite striking, I think, particularly in this sector, is brand is quite a nebulous thing, isn't it? And I'm not sure, certainly from my experience of speaking to lots of clients, if there is an integrated or a sort of universal definition of what brand is, because do we take the definition that's in the sort of commercial space? Are we looking at purpose? Is it different? Because in this sector, we've got to be able to fundraise against brand. So could you just share with me what your definition is? And Simon, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, so I'm coming at this probably from a slightly different angle. So I'm not your traditional marketeer. So I'm coming at this from the point of view that I'm, the CEO of a large, well-known charity, and we live in a world where everybody seems to have some kind of personal brand. So I think when I'm looking at this, my definition goes back to what I said earlier. It's all about, it's not your logo, it's not the branding. It's far from that. It's about your charitable ambition and your purpose. It's about your values, and it's about your culture as an organization. And it's about how you articulate those from an internal organizational point of view, but also from an external organizational point of view. So for us, as a fundraising organization and an organization that makes grants to charities across the UK, the way that we manage that is through our storytelling. We use that word a lot in BBC Children in Need, probably because we're very connected to a storytelling broadcaster, but it is absolutely vital to us that we're able to get our message across, talk about our brand in the stories that we tell. And that we've launched our appeal this week, as I say, and that's about shifting perceptions around what it is to be young and growing up in a country like the UK today amidst a pandemic, and being able to articulate that. And for me, that is my definition of brand, and that is closely linked to influence and reputation, but predominantly about what is your charitable ambition, what do you stand for as an organisation, and how do you talk about that?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. What about you, Jane? What's your definition? So you're just on mute. So you just need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I agree with what Simon just said, and I raise him. My definition of brand is that it needs to succinctly define why your charity exists. So whenever I'm challenged in terms of why we're doing something, whether that's our international work, to go on the controversial side, or our lifeboats, or our lifeguards, or our water safety work, or indeed, why we rescue migrants in the Channel, we can say it all in 4 words, which is to save everyone. So for me, the brand is the distinct embodiment of that why we exist. And if we keep coming back to that, we won't go wrong with our messaging, our content, or any other part of our communications.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And what about you, Angela? Having just launched a new brand campaign, you must have been thinking about this a lot. What's your definition?
Yeah, so I guess for me, the brand is kind of other people's perceptions of you, and that perception comes about through a lot of things. So it can come about through your values, your messaging, the way you look, the way, I mean, for us, it's the way, this kind of the experience that people might get if they're in one of our shops, or if they're cared for in one of our hospices or one of our neurological centres. And that all kind of comes together to kind of build your brands. But I think being as consistent as you possibly can be gives people clarity, of your purpose and of why you're here. And I think that's probably one of the most important things. We might not have lots of money necessarily to put behind our brands, but if we can be as consistent as we possibly can in our messaging and you know, in our tone of voice and the way we look, then I think that does bring about clarity for the supporter.
And what about you, Deborah? Your definition? If you just put yourself, I think you're just on mute.
I agree with the other three, obviously. I think lots of great points in all of that. I think if I was to synthesize it, for me, I think brand is about the essence of the organization. I think that's how I would summarize kind of what everybody says from different angles. It's about, you know, why you exist, how you exist, what you do. So for us at Independent Age, it's about the direct delivery of services with older people. It's about our influencer campaigning. It's about our role to convene and build capacity within the older people sector. That's our contribution to the kind of the broader spectrum of ensuring that, you know, we can all grow old well with dignity, choice and purpose. And for me, it's a bit like, brand's a bit like an iceberg. So there's all this stuff below the surface that you need to get right. All of those building blocks around, you know, your strategy, your mission, your activities, your values, your how you see, for example, your EDI principles, very important to us as well. And then you have on top of it the bit that people see, which is really the kind of in a sense, the window to all of that. And it has to have, you know, you have to be able to scratch that superficial lens of, you know, tone or color or logo or cool imagery or funky graphics, and have something underneath it that really people know that they, for us, it's about that people know that they can trust, that we understand what we're talking about, that, you know, we're compassionate. So for me, compassion is about empathy with action, that we are collaborative, and everything we need to do has to be about that. So, you know, bringing that to life, for example, lots of charities, you know, in the 30 years I've worked in charities, say that, you know, oh, we work in partnership, we're very collaborative, but they'll never promote another charity's campaign. And they'll never go, wow, did you see that over there that competitor charity did, which was really cool, and so they're completely breaking their own brand if that's part of their values as an organization. And quite frankly, I've got no time for that personally, and so we will have no time for that at Independent Age, because, you know, what we're about is about growing old well. It's about a positive experience of later life. So, you know we cannot deliver that possibly on our own, but maybe together we can. So I guess, you know, brand, essence of what we do, but with these kind of two things, the below the water, kind of all of the depth and content, and above it, something that communicates that depth, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And what's really interesting is that you're all agreed. It sounds like a really simplistic question, I know, but I think it's actually quite important to just align our definition at the outset. So what you're all talking about is purpose. You're all talking about the reason why you exist. And I guess the brand expression is the dramatization, the creative dramatization of that. Would you say that brand, and what you're describing is so important? I mean, being able to articulate and communicate the reason why you exist is so important. But we know that brand investment comes under great scrutiny. So do you think that there is enough awareness within charity organizations about brand? How do you go about making the case for investment? Simon, I'm going to come over to you.
Okay. Well, I sometimes think that in some instances, and it's interesting, it made me think about it when you introduced me and you said I previously worked for an organisation called We Are With You, which has recently changed its name, because that's not the organisation I remember working for. It was called Addaction. And I wonder whether underneath any of that, anything has dramatically changed in terms of the way that organisation is set up and structured, and wants to make a difference to the lives of the people it supports. And I say that because I think sometimes what happens in this situation is people do get confused with the name of the organisation, and investment in a fancy new logo, or a new strap line. It was lovely to hear what Jane was talking about holding on to what you have. And I go back to we don't have, let's start with answering your question. We don't have much challenge in our organisation in terms of thinking about investment in brand. But I want to caveat that with, and maybe I'm saying something awful here, I don't think, alongside the BBC, so I don't think you need a huge amount of money in this space. This is not something that requires massive investment in terms of money. It goes back to your point about dramatisation and my earlier reflections on storytelling. I think there's something here about recognising the power of your organisation if you get those things right. If you get your purpose right, if you're relevant and you're contemporary, but you're prepared to push the boundaries, and you're prepared to tell stories that maybe will quite surprise your audience and supporters, then I think you're in good territory. But it goes back to what Deborah was saying, is that this is iceberg stuff. It doesn't happen by accident. It does need careful consideration and thought. So we've been thinking at Children in Need about I don't like calling it vision or mission. So we describe it as our charitable ambition. What's our purpose? And the initial thought was, this will take a couple of months to sort out. That was the discussion that we had at exec. But I have to say, it's taken us nearly 18 months. And I'm pleased that we took that time, because where we've ended up, I think, is something that is really powerful in terms of the children and young people sector, and can stand us out as a real leader in terms of championing children and young people. And for me, that's the important part about this. The investment is in the conversations and discussions to get to a point where you know what it is you genuinely and authentically want to talk about.
And there is a natural tension, though, that exists within organisations between the brand and the fundraising. So how might you go about trying to reconcile that tension and bring teams together so that they're working in a more integrated way? Deborah, I'm going to come over to you and ask you that question.
Thank you. Okay. I will just want to say I completely agree with Simon. Actually, the investment is in getting that core, the under the iceberg, under the surface right, and not rushing to do the visual interpretation of that before you have some of those answers. Actually, I think that's from my learning. So certainly, having done probably 2 or 3 brand refreshes at Bowel Cancer UK over the sort of 10 years that I was chief executive there, that's certainly what we learned from that. So I think I'm being really boring, but I think it all comes back to strategy, Nilesha. I think it's about, if you want to have an integrated brand, you need to be clear about where you're going and how all of the parts fit together. And I think if you agree about, so the classic tension often, and certainly felt this at Independent Age as well, around services having one view of the world. So, for example, we take an asset-based approach to the delivery of our services. So this is about building on people's strengths and community assets, and making sure that it's about supporting people in the ways that they determine, rather than that we determine for them, so that they define how they work with us rather than us defining them. So it's very positive, actually, because our view is that by the time people come to work with us and draw on our services, they've probably been around for a while, so they've got lots of strengths and thoughts, and they don't need some paternalistic charity telling them what to do, quite frankly. Now, the challenge is that actually what sells is the sad, lonely older person. That's the kind of classic fundraising kind of pitch. They don't want to hear about the amazing life stories and strength and resilience that many people in later life, all the amazing things that they've gone through, but also what they're managing as they grow older. That, it's just easier to go, oh, let's tell the sad story and make everyone cry a little bit, but that's so detrimental to older people, because it presents a picture of weakness and of just need of taking rather than all that older people contribute. So in order to address that, actually you have to find that set of messages that best describe that, but in a way that resonate with people, that show the truth that actually we all struggle at different points in our lives, and we as a charity are there for people over the age of 65 who, perhaps they are struggling with financial insecurity or with low social connection, but that doesn't make them weak, it just makes them human. And we need to find the ways of ensuring that we're fundraising really and authentically, but not actually letting us all down. Because if we're all privileged enough to go to later life, none of us want to be imaged like that either, right? And so it's about clear strategy, clear messages, making sure that all of your messages work for your different audience, including your fundraising audience. And this is particularly important because, ultimately people give to charities probably for two core reasons. One, because you've done something that impacts their lives directly, and they go, that's just amazing, thank you. Or the lives of somebody they loved. Or you're talking about a set of issues that really resonate with them, and so it becomes part of their lived experience, or that they can imagine, or that they are perhaps becoming. And so actually your target audience for your fundraising is probably exactly the same people you're describing. So you have to get those messages right, because actually, are we saying that all of our donors are sad, miserable older people who are all a bit pathetic? No, absolutely not. And that's why this is so important to get right.
And what about you, Angela? What's your thoughts? Because having launched a new brand campaign, from your experience, did you encounter any tension between the fundraising and the brand communication?
So we work really closely with fundraising. Actually, we have a really, really good relationship. It probably hasn't always been that way, and you can really see the value in it. So, for example, when we developed our brand campaign, our fundraising team were involved in that development with us. And whilst it doesn't have a monetary ask, it still meets some of fundraising objectives. So, for example, they can use our campaign to go out and have conversations with people. We are getting people on the database, which meets some of their objectives. And the same when we have a fundraising campaign, then the Marcoms team are fully involved in working with fundraising to make sure that it helps to raise the brand as well. So we kind of both see it as supporting each other. And we basically aligned our brand and our fundraising messages for kind of maximum effect. So we had our brand messaging, which is the what we do, so everyone kind of knows how to explain what Sue Ryder does. And then we developed a fundraising proposition, which is the kind of why. So that was the kind of emotional connection with people. And then we basically done training of our fundraising teams and our Marcoms team to show how there's not a right or a wrong messaging. They work together, and you can use one or the other. But basically to show everybody how you might use them. And we've continued, and it was still a journey that we're on, but we're continuing to support the teams to kind of know when to dial up and when to dial down each of the messaging. So it's working. It works well. I think there's quite a lot of mutual respect between the teams for each other. So I have sign off on fundraising campaigns, fundraising director has sign off on brand campaigns. So there's a lot of kind of co-creation and collaboration that goes on. And I think that is working well.
That's really good. And in terms of looking at the future then, in a post-pandemic climate, do you think brand is more important now than ever before? What's your reflection, Jane, on that?
Can I just skip back to that last question about thank you.
Yes.
Just about the kind of tension between brand and brand spend and fundraising spend. So first of all, we don't spend any money on brand campaigns at all, ever. So our brand is entirely built on, to illustrate Simon's point around our ability to communicate through stories what we do in order to save everyone. So and we mainly do that through media channels, so that are free, as long as the story's good. Yeah, so our PR team is my brand team. That's how I view them, and they're all absolutely clear about that. So we don't have that tension between what are we going to invest in. So that's number one. The second thing I think is the kind of that sort of, when you start getting into the detail of messaging for fundraising campaigns, I really firmly believe that your job as a fundraiser is to make the donor feel as passionate about your mission as you do. And if you don't feel driven by your own mission, then I suggest you're probably not in the right organisation for you. And listening to the people around, I can hear that coming through. I can't wait to see your new branding, Simon. So moving that on, how does that, what does the future look like for branding? So we are entering a massively competitive time for charities. We have a massively booming legacy opportunity that everybody I speak to is competing for their share of. In order to win your share of it, you don't start with doing legacy campaigns. You start with the why. You start by telling your story. You start by engaging people and bringing them on a journey with you. But that journey must include, for the donor, the fact that they feel that complete commitment to you, and you are their charity. They are never one of your donors. So being completely and utterly clear about what that relationship looks like with your donor and how you make them feel is how brand is going to serve charities going into this very competitive world.
And so going back to that question then, Simon, sorry, did you want to say?
I was just going to say, I think that is such an important message. I would argue that brand has always been important, but I don't think everybody takes it as seriously as they should do. And that's where there's a problem of potentially complacency. I love what the RNLI did this year, because if you've got a strong brand, you can be really proud of it, and you can stand up for issues when you are challenged, and that's what the RNLI did. And I think probably you've had a really good year in terms of income, haven't you, Jane, because of that? And I think that's part of that was probably wasn't planned, that experience, but because you were so clear about your brand and your message, you were able to respond in a way which was not defensive, which was confident, and with a great degree of pride and responsibility. And I think that plays to three things for me that's going on in the world today, which I think has changed as part of the pandemic. And those three things focus on a world, it's not completely there, but a world that feels that kindness is important. We've got a long way to go, but I think the last 18 months has probably raised people's thoughts about how important it is to be kind. I think even though the pandemic has caused a sense of isolation, it's never made us feel more connected. And I think that's a connection is so important. And then I think the final thing, and this is why the RNLI story is such a good one, and we work on this in BBC Children in Need, is this sense of activism that's out there. So people don't want to just say, oh, look, it's BBC Children in Need, it's their appeal season again. What they want to know is, well, what do you stand for, Children in Need? What is it you believe in about children and young people? And how are you going to motivate me to support you? And that sense of activism that people have, again, I think it's developing and growing, we're not completely there, is how we can engage those our supporters to play to that point that they don't just want to give you £10 on a text to donate, that they want to give you their support because you're going to make a difference to whether it's newly arrived children and young people, or older people, they know you're going to make a difference, and that's the bit you've got to get across. And you should be confident of that, and not embarrassed or ashamed.
I just take that on one more level, Simon, which is to say that how you make that person feel about themselves is the next thing. And basically, in an uncertain world, how they have some control about the difference they can make, despite the fact that they may feel, as we've all done over the last 18 months, quite out of control in their own lives. So it's a way of kind of giving trust to, an extrinsic brand, but in doing so, being part of something much bigger than you feel part of when you're isolated on your Zoom call or wherever you are.
So it's really interesting, because what you're talking about, I think, is giving people a role in your brand story, and an agency, and the importance of co-creation and feeling that, people are owning the brand just as much as you are defining it. So Angela, talk to me about, from an audience perspective, how you are going about, certainly from Sue Ryder's experience, creating a brand that is really driving connection with the audience and co-creation.
Yes, so everything that we do, our fundraising, appeals, our brand activity, we do based around evidence, and that's really important to us. So we do a lot of research into the Grief Kind campaign. We did a lot of research. The first piece of research we did was to understand what people wanted to hear from us about in this post-COVID world. We were running a campaign just before lockdown, which was called A Better Death. So it was all about death and dying, and dying well. But as we went into COVID, that message wasn't appropriate. And so we pulled that campaign. And as we began to come out of COVID, we went out to our supporters and to a cold audience too, to see what they wanted to hear from us about. Did they want to hear about death and dying, or did they want to hear about bereavement? And actually, people told us not only did they want to hear about bereavement, but they wanted to hear about not their own bereavement, but how they could support others, how they could support their friends, their families, and their colleagues. And so that really shaped our campaign, and in a way that shaped our brand and what we're doing next. And that's, that kind of research and touching base with our supporters, whether it's through surveys or whether it's through focus groups, is what we do. We do it all the time for every campaign.
And what about you, Jack? Your reflections
on engaging supporters in it? Well, obviously absolutely critical. And I think it was something Simon was saying that just really resonated with me, particularly from previous experience at Bowel Cancer UK, actually, that for me there was something, just such an important, what I would call a kind of a golden thread between us and our donors. And our donors tended to be people affected by bowel cancer, slightly inevitably, whether that is directly as somebody with bowel cancer or as somebody who is close to someone with them. And actually what felt like the greatest honour, but also the greatest responsibility, was that when people donated or fundraised, they were doing it in the hope and out of belief and trust that we were going to do something to stop this happening to other people. And that is just so precious. Actually, it's one of the most beautiful things, I think, when you have people around you and with you that you can experience. So I just say, if I guess my addition to that was actually, I can't overstress how important that is. And certainly I can't speak for the past at Independent Age. I've only been around for a couple of years, but certainly that's very front of mind as we go about, as we're, remodeling some of our services, very much based on impact and difference. So I think one of the things that charities often do is account outputs as outcomes, whereas we really want to be focused on outcomes and impact, and actually the difference that we're genuinely making. And then building that sense and creation. So for me, is I want people to be able to go, that's my charity. But I love Independent Age, that I'm part of it. This is my charity. And when you get to that point, and I think in the 10 years I was privileged to lead Bowel Cancer UK, I felt like we got to that point, can't speak for the 2 years subsequent, you know, people were absolutely saying that this is my charity. They are making a difference in my life and in my family's life. And for me, the greatest testament of that is, you know, I have been in touch with families I knew who have lost loved ones or patients as they've gone through it now for 10 or 11 years. Well, 12, 13 actually in some cases. And that's that because it's the genuine connection, listening really hard, understanding their experience, trying to really ensure that their needs, views and perspectives are front and center of everything that you do, so that you're building that kind of trust and security. And that's what we must create at Independent Age.
I think what you're touching on is really interesting, because you're talking about the power of authenticity also.
Hugely important.
Absolutely critical. So let's just quickly talk about what I think is really important, which is measurement. How are we measuring the success of brand impact? And then we'll go over to some questions, because there's a couple in the chat. Simon, I'm going to come over to you.
I think this is the $64,000 question, isn't it? How do we do it at BBC Children in Need? Well, if you want to reduce it to its most basic sense, it's about income in one sense, because what we need to do is raise money to give out funding to brilliant organisations across the UK. But I'm increasingly of the belief that that's one way of looking at it. But what we've got to think about, I'm not saying we've completely answered the question, although I think increasingly what's important to us is insight. So we have a team looking at insight all of the time that looks at insight around our impact as a funder and a grant maker, but also our impact as a storyteller. But in all of that, the real thing that we need to think about is, well, have we affected change? Have we done something that has enabled for us, children and young people, for their lives to be better? Not just the ones that we support through the organisations that we fund, but those children and young people who need our support but we can't reach. Who have we changed the systems and procedures that will allow them to be brilliant children and young people to achieve their ambitions? And it's a really difficult question to answer in terms of insight, but I think we have to find a way of doing that. So, you know, at its most basic, are we raising enough money to make a difference? You know, are we sustaining the organisation? But are we genuinely and authentically delivering change?
What about you, Angela? How are you measuring the success of your launch campaign?
So I would agree with Simon. So we obviously measure income, as everybody does. For the success of Grief Kind, we are going to be measuring people's understanding of what it means to be Grief Kind. You know, what we want to see is that we have helped many people to become Grief Kind, which has that kind of knock-on effect of kind of making us a more compassionate community, really. On a day-to-day basis, we have brand measures which we measure for YouGov, so we can see if they're changing, if they're spiking because of activity, and we look at the halo effect too. So as an example, we had Lisa Riley talking on ITV's Lorraine this morning, and then the immediate effect we can see from that is that there are many more people going to our bereavement services and using our services. So it's quite, because of a lot of our bereavement services are online, so it's really easy for us to measure and to kind of and to see the immediate impact. So that's a good tool for us. But as Simon said, I guess the ultimate thing is that you are actually doing what you're supposed to be doing and helping people, so that we are, you know, giving people the care they need in our hospices. We are helping people to become Grief Kind, and I guess we are becoming more influential. So yeah, it's a tricky it's tricky to measure, but we try very hard to measure both the kind of the daily granular impact and the bigger impact too.
And what about you, Jane? Your reflections?
So I keep it really simple, as I do most things in my life, or I try to. If we answer the question, what is the RNLI brand for? As I said earlier, and it's to raise income and to influence people around water safety, it becomes really, really tangible to be able to measure both of those things. So from an income point of view, it's not just 1 year's income, it's how long our supporters engage for with us, how long they last, and ultimately, I use the piece of jargon that we all love, which is the lifetime value of those supporters. And increasingly, we're looking to conversion rates to legacy giving. So that's a whole lifetime journey of measurement. And on the influencing side around water safety, we target very specific audiences with very specific messages, and then we check whether they've understood them or not. So we know who we've reached, and we check in with them to see that, you know, our kids' water safety song that was shown on kids' TV channels this year is remembered, and the children and more importantly actually the parents that have been listening to their kids singing that over and over again understand the key things to do if their child gets into danger on the beach. So yeah, simplicity. You're on mute now.
Deborah, your views on measurement and impact?
I suppose it comes back to, I've been struck by this listening to the answers, what your view is about what brand is. So given mine is more about something much more total around the organisation, it's more than just the visual interpretation of something. I guess what I'm looking for is what impact is the charity actually having. That's how I start to measure it. So you clearly have to have, you know, we have, you know, evaluation mechanisms in place for all of our services, which are very much about looking at what difference are we actually making in somebody's life around perhaps the 5, you know, looking at using things like the 5 ways to well-being with people. But at the same time, of course, all that stuff around, you know, referrals into our services. Do people know that we're there? Are they referring in? Are we raising some cash now? I mean, we're random in the charity sector, being 158 years old and having a very new fundraising mechanism. You know, it's quite new at independent age because we are a, you know, Victorian endowed charity. So we've relied over many years on that endowment income rather than on fundraising income. So this is all kind of new world to independent age, but certainly not new to me in 30 years in the charity sector. But so of course we will also measure, you know, general awareness levels, engagement with parliamentarians, media, income that's coming into the organisation to look at the effectiveness of our overarching kind of brand strategy. But you know, I'm with Jane, simple's good. So I don't want to make it overcomplicated, but ultimately, you know, I have a penchant for actually getting to the why. So it's actually what difference are we actually making? That feels the most important thing. And actually, you may have raised. So I was in a bereavement meeting just yesterday, for example, and actually we were looking at how do we ensure commissioning is consistent across the UK. Well, actually talking to experts in that field, what I was hearing is actually lots of organisations really don't know, you know, who needs the services, where they are, what interventions absolutely work and what difference that they're making. So you can say how fantastic, you know, 90,000 people called my advice line or took part in this service, but actually if you don't know what difference you're making, why the heck do you exist? And actually, are you using money wisely? I mean, we have to challenge ourselves in the voluntary sector, not to be blasé and just to go to the superficial. You know, that's what we should be doing. We should be really understanding the impact. And I think some of the challenge in the voluntary sector, it has been that there's been brand wars between organisations fighting for space, fighting for resources, and not actually always using them efficiently or effectively. And that can crowd out actually really beautiful examples of best practice that deserve more time and energy. So I think for us as an organisation, we will have a simple framework for measuring the impact of what we do, of which the kind of core awareness levels that go with kind of the branding stuff will be part of it.
So just in the interest of time, I'm going to fire some questions now. So there's one that's just come in, which is from Becca, who asks, are there differences in your brand for regional, national and international audiences? Simon, I'm going to ask you this question.
I suppose that I'm not seeing any. I mean, we're UK wide, not international. So we will think very carefully about the stories we tell across the 4 nations and how we tell them. But we have a very joined up campaign that doesn't necessarily differentiate. It's a high level campaign about, you know, getting a kind of sense of togetherness around supporting children and young people to be the best they can be, and then we try and bring that down into, you know, whether that's a different story in Glasgow to Bristol, it may be, but it'll all be built around that particular brand campaign.
And Jane, there's a specific question for you, which is anonymous, but it says, I'm really interested in your recent brilliant ! Reaction Michael Farage's comments, and whether that huge engagement with your charity and brand led to an increase in long-term donors.
Yes, is a simple answer. During that maelstrom, as I like to call it, we over about 3 days we recruited 40,000 donors that were new to us, and about a third of those were regular givers. So they will go on, and I think we calculated they're probably going to be worth something like £11 million over 5 years.
And Deborah, a question for you. Would be great to hear more about how you dealt with brand when Bowel Cancer UK and Beating Bowel Cancer merged. What were the challenges and how did you create the new united brand? You've just got a couple of minutes, so maybe some of the key points.
What I'd say is mergers are not for the faint-hearted, but they for sure, but really important actually. So how do we deal with the challenges? We went really back to core who we were and what it was we wanted to achieve, as I've been talking about. So that kind of what was the new charity going to be delivering? We involved people with bowel cancer and their families and broader support base in deciding on, you know, that kind of core story and brand, that kind of classic branding piece that the agencies like your lovely selves do around, that they take you through what do you want people to think, feel, do about you, in order to and we went through lots of iterations of that, almost in order to get to a point where I think we could probably have done it on our own, but we needed to go through a process because it was a new charity. So it was complicated bringing everyone together, but I think if you go back to mission, you find the right answers in the end.
Great. And a question regarding how you roll out brands internally and take people on the journey. This is a question, I think, for Angela, because I know that we were talking about this previously.
This is really interesting, actually. And I think what we learned is that we want our colleagues to really feel part of our brand and to live our brand and to be brand champions. We don't want them just to be on the fringes, but that can be quite a challenge when you've got people who are perhaps working in IT or in our shops who kind of are quite disparate and they feel quite distant from it. So we put a lot of effort in, and we still do, into kind of going around, talking to them all, explaining to them about the brand, what we want to do. And we constantly share stories with them so that they feel that whatever their job is, they are still helping us to be there when it matters. It's really important to us that they feel that whatever they're doing, whether they're you know, a chef in one of our hospices, whether in one of our shops, whether in our IT team, they're still helping us to be there when it matters. And that I think is really key. And I think earlier this week, actually, we had a video out with some celebrities who had done some stuff around Grief Kind for us. And one of our colleagues got in contact with me and said to me, you know, when I watched that video, I just felt so proud to work for Zoo Rider. And I've never felt like that before. And I was so proud. And that's what we want to get to with everyone. We want everyone to feel that proud to work for us, because then they will become brand ambassadors for us, and they kind of, it's not just our job to kind of raise a brand, it's everybody's, and they will help us to do that.
And before we close, if there's one piece of advice that you would give to our audience, what might that be in relation to brand? Jane, I'm going to ask you this question.
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up where Angela left off, actually, in terms of the internal, making everybody, you know, come back to my One Crew message, making everybody feel as though they own that brand is the key to it. So my hint, I suppose, tip in terms of tactics around how to do that is basically launch an internal campaign to convince people in exactly the same way as you would if you were convincing people to give to you. So take it as seriously internally as you do to an external audience, and get the creative done first, because if the creative's good, you'll get lots more buy-in much more easily, because that's how humans rock.
Absolutely. Deborah, your advice, please.
Once you get your strategy right, make sure that when you consider what you want people to think, feel and do, that you don't forget your staff. What is it that you want them to think, feel and do? And how are they going to go and support you in that journey? I think that's the key thing. It's actually ensuring that people understand their place in delivering on that mission, and how their work as brand ambassadors will enable you to be so much more than you would be on your own. Absolutely.
Thank you. And Simon?
I think you've got to be a personal champion. You've got to show everybody the connection between your charitable ambition and the difference you want to make and your brand. And I think you've got to work hard at it. It's not something that you can start and put down. It's a daily kind of thing. And I think everybody's pretty much covered up all the other hints and tips as well. But it's a day-to-day thing, I think.
And Angela, final reflections from you.
So I think it's important that everybody in your organisation understands that you're in this for the long term. It's not a quick fix. You're not going to raise brand overnight. You need to keep going, and as Jane said, to kind of build those internal champions and run that internal campaign.
Thank you so much. We've run out of time. I mean, I feel like I could talk to you for at least another hour. It's been such a pleasure to welcome you, and a very big thank you to you, Simon, Deborah, Jane and Angela. It's been really fascinating to hear your insights. I hope it was really useful to you in the audience. We wish you and your brands and your teams well, and thank you very much to the audience for joining us. So do look out for future events. On the 4th of November, we will be hosting Giving Britain. So there is a save the date in the chat, and this will be the event of the year, where we will be unveiling the findings of our new research designed to challenge the truths around how Britain gives and the deep-seated preconceptions we have of people's giving behaviours. So do join us for that. We've also got one more change conversation happening before the year closes, so do watch out for more information. We'll be announcing that soon. But from me, thank you very much for joining us. I know it's a big ask to get people to pay attention to Zoom after the 18 months that we've had. So it's been a real pleasure. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.